Good going for a while just to get some fruit. Now, in the proceedings, I list the varieties that we have here that performed fairly well, and on the table in table 1, I think most of you don't have your proceedings with you, but if you're interested in thinking about growing for your own use or maybe small commercial, that table will give you a list of some of the varieties that we tested, and on the right are comments where I'll talk about like their disease susceptibility, ones that were more resistant or susceptible. And what we have, what's as important as knowing what was adapted here is in table 2 you will find a list of what we found really did not perform well at all, okay, at this particular site. So that doesn't mean in your site they may perform okay, but pretty much they didn't do well here, and if you're in a site similar to this, I would probably recommend, if you ask me, to avoid planting those particular varieties. And those are in table 2. I just want to do, just real quickly, some basics for those of you who may not really grow. Most of you are probably range and beef people here. But most of our fruit and nut trees are grown on rootstocks, and that's for disease and pest resistance. And so you'll see that I've listed what rootstocks we used and which varieties perform best on which rootstocks. And so that's really important to keep in mind when you're ordering your particular fruit or nut trees. The other thing, of course, is to keep in mind is that these foothill soils are a real challenge. And so when you're growing fruit and nut trees, typically we say if you're growing on more challenging soils, you plant your trees more closely together. And I'll tell you, up here, and I mentioned that in my write-up, is I don't know exactly in 92 what we were thinking. Well, we've gotten closer and closer, even in the valley, tighter and tighter, higher densities, planting trees anyway. But back in 92, we should have spaced these more closely together. And so I would recommend that you go with the closest spacings you can if you're planting on this kind of a soil, because the trees aren't going to grow as large as they are on a good soil. And the other factor, though, is that we really do want to keep these trees smaller, because in this backyard situation or a small commercial, you don't have the kind of equipment we have down the valley for harvesting and whatnot that makes it much easier to handle larger trees. The other thing that when we planted this plot, our initial intention, and from about 1992 till I think it was about 2001, our idea was to do pest management that was using more reduced risk or environmental friendly type materials. I actually did a lot of tests up here. I tried pheromones, which don't work on small acreage, which we knew, but I tested anyway. All kinds of different materials, Bacillus thuringiensis and whatnot. Some of those were successful, many of them weren't. Around 2001, we went organic on here, and that was because we entered into a contract with a company that sells organic produce through subscription up in Nevada City. And so we actually did farm this organically, and that's when we switched to organic type fertilizers, compost, blood meal for nitrogen, because originally we were using inorganic nitrogen sources. We put in some cover crops. You can still see some of the clover in here that has come up or continued to come up. I saw some over there. And that did, though, present some other challenges like weed control around the trees and whatnot. But we were able to grow these organically. And so if people are interested in doing that, you can do it. Now, what we have remaining here are, we've got these are cherries, which are now from neglect here going, and you know, I mean, basically, I don't know how long they're going to keep these here. Some of these are going to have to go pretty soon, but they've been getting some fruit from them. And I mentioned, like with cherries up here, the cherries, the peaches, especially the Red Haven, which we left, which I've noted is a very, very good producer up here, very well adapted. The white nectars, you have to net those. If you really want to have any produce, you have to net them from the birds. The birds also like the walnuts, the pecans. You really have to pretty much net those. Also, of course, up here, the wild turkey love the chestnuts. They jump the fence. The other thing is, if you're really serious, is we put in the deer fencing right away. So we haven't had to deal with deer, except one time when I noticed a deer got stuck in here, a young deer, and I was able to go around and see how much browse damage they did, which pretty much they nibble on most everything. So it's very hard to deal with deer unless you've got, you know, a fence like this. Let's see. Some of the best adapted plum was the Santa Rosa plum. It's actually done well. It still is. And the Patterson apricot. And we have some younger apricots, and I listed those in there on that table. That there's one that seems to be doing well, and you have to really watch what rootstock you use there. What I'd like to do is, I have just, if you're interested, you can take one of these handouts. Actually, there's 2 pages. And yeah, they're in 2-page things. 2-page. The last ones are the colored ones. You have 2 handouts here, and over the time here, I had actually several field meetings, and I guess I forgot it, but I have the trout. Yeah, you actually, if you mind going and getting it, it's in that bag. Let's just turn to the one that says Simus at the front. Looks like this. Daily report. For irrigation here, we had drip to start with, and then we went to micro sprinkler, or we had both drip and micro sprinkler, which work well on these kinds of soils. And then we set up an irrigation schedule, which we are able to do, and we use what's called ET, or evapotranspiration data, historical data, to do that. And what you see here is that there's all these weather stations throughout the state, and they're called Simus, and one of them happens to be right here on the REC. I always call it the field station, so I'm just going to call it the field station here. I got used to calling it that. Until, as in the university, we're always changing our name on things. So I'm just kind of showing you here is that you can access this weather too if you just want really good weather. And I put in, I think this is a daily report. You can get hourly, daily, monthly, whatever you want. And if you look in that first column, Simus ETO, that's the evapotranspiration of the grass in inches. And then we have these tree crop coefficients. And in that proceedings, I put down how to get to these different websites. And you can get a lot of information. And from that, we can calculate what's actually being used, and then we figure out how much water to put on. And one of the key features here is that we tried to put it on in shorter sets. We tried to put it on in shorter sets so that we didn't get runoff. If you run it too long, you start to get runoff in the soil. You also never want, with fruit and nut trees, to let your soil get saturated. Okay? And I'm just going to kind of run through this stuff because you have it. If you have any questions. The other one is the UCIPM online here. And again, I tell you how to get to, there's a really good part there with the UCIPM where you can go to any of the tree crops that you want and get all the pest information, and you can get it geared to the commercial grower or the backyard grower. And you can also calculate what we call degree days for the insects, like the calling moth and peach tree borer, which were problems up here. And that's what I'm showing here. And I just put down, just so you can see, on March 30th, if we have a couple apples left here. Where you're standing was all apple varieties, on several apple varieties on 2 different rootstocks. We only have 2 left that we kept. And calling moth was a real problem. That's what causes those wormy apples. And we finally figured out how to spray them up here. There's some newer materials, some virus materials that might be good for small commercial orchards now also. But we would put a trap up, and I don't have it put together, but there's all kinds of different traps. And so if you have these crops, you do want to monitor your insects. So you get a trap, make up the trap. This is a top, sticky liner bottom that with the insects stick in, and then you have a specific pheromone, and these are in this little kind of rubber septum, and you just put these in the trap, and then you can monitor. And what we get is when we have our first trap catches, we call it biofix. We set the date, and March 30th, this is a date that down in the valley, many of the orchards have this year for our calling moth flight. And then it calculates these degree days, and we know when we should spray. And on Thursday, if we had caught the moth up here on March 30th, April 23rd, 250 degree days, we would be applying our first spray up here with Bacillus thuringiensis if we went that route. And then we'd have to put on 4 sprays during that first generation only. It's fairly intense. So I know when I was working with the field guys, they go, whoa, I mean, there's a lot. They had to trap, and I was telling them when we had to spray and what sprays to put on the dormant season, and then we had to do all the pruning. So anyway, you get an idea. If you decide to plant fruit and nut trees and neglect them, this is what it's going to look like within just a few years or a couple years. So I would do it if you really like working on taking care of those. And some of them, of course, are more intense than others. So I wanted to kind of show you what the resources are. And I do want to say, though, that up here, and it's in that table too, is that the nectarines did not perform here at all. And we had a lot of different varieties. The peaches overall did, but the nectarines did not. So I would really avoid planting nectarines up here at all. They never produced well. They have thrips problems. They got peach leaf curl more than the peaches, even with the same sprays. They just didn't produce. But Red Haven here, great peach for up here. It's done very, very well. The white nectar. And then I list the others. They all, most of the peaches actually did perform pretty well. So, and they're both on the same rootstock, but the nectarines just don't seem to like it.
Janine, are there any more resistant to the peach leaf curl than others?
There are, some of the varieties are more sensitive than others. Overall, just up here, the nectarines were worse than the peaches. Down, yes, I mean they are, but it's almost every peach can pretty much get it if we have the right conditions. And this year down the valley, we have the right conditions. So even growers who, all the growers always spray, there's more peach leaf curl than I've seen in the wild, and that's because we had all that rain during bloom. Yes?
So the BT is effective with the codling moth caterpillars even when they're larger? I think you said 4 times per generation.
Yeah. Now, Bacillus thuringiensis is a biological insecticide, and it works on a lot of different larvae, and some of the larvae you're talking about, they have to be very small when you use it, like red hump caterpillar. But for codling moth, BT is not a material a commercial grower would normally use, okay? Up here, we were trying to do what we could organically, and we did get it to work, but you have to put on 4 sprays for 1 generation. Normally, growers down the valley will just put on 3 sprays for the whole season. And we had to put on 4 sprays per generation. We had to do that like, 4, 8, we put on like 12 sprays in a season, okay? But that was the organic. And if you're not organic, then you can use other materials, or if you don't, there's this new virus material that is looking good, but again, you have to put on a fair amount of sprays. It's kind of a short-lived material.
Okay.
So
I was curious because with the oak moth, you have to get them when they're just like that, and you do once, and you're suggesting that even the bigger ones will.
With codling moth, you have to get them at the very beginning. You just have to keep hitting it with BT. But yes, for any of those other larvae, like I said, red hump or what you're talking about, definitely you want them when they're small with BT. Then it can be very effective.
Thank you.
Yes.
Would you recommend 2 or 3 low-maintenance fruit or nut trees that could grow in this area in an organic manner? It doesn't require a lot of
well, the pecans, what we found, now the pecans though, you have to use zinc to get them growing, and you're going to have to use zinc occasionally, which you can apply organically. And if you look at pecans, we haven't done much to it. If you get the zinc on them and you give them some nitrogen, they haven't had the aphid, because pecans can be very susceptible to like black aphid. We haven't seen that at all up here. And so pretty much I think they're one that you could look at, but you really have to get on that zinc to get them established. The walnuts did well in the beginning, but they just, even on Paradox rootstock, this soil just not good. They basically went down after 8 to 9 years. And what's left has extreme sapsucker damage in the trunk. Not that that hurts it, but they just aren't as adapted. Fruit trees, perhaps the apricot, the Patterson has done well, but in a wet season, you're going to get some brown rot, and it's hard to have good organic type sprays for that. Cherries, same way. You may get some brown. We haven't had that much brown rot though with the cherries up here. So we were able to do those. And cherries don't need pruning very much. The spurs live like 10 years, so you don't have to prune them as much. You have to prune the apricots a little bit more. But they are going to need nitrogen. Okay, and that's what these haven't had for a while, and they're definitely showing it.
About
Santa Rosa plums and pomegranates.
Citrus and
Can't kill
olives.
either one.
Olives, I didn't plant up here. Olives can handle poorer soils, shallower soils. So olives should do fine. Citrus, we have citrus in the Butte foothills. We have citrus up in like Nevada City area and whatnot. So yes, I think if you get like a Satsuma mandarin that can handle colder temperatures. Actually, the temperatures up here don't typically get any colder, or maybe not as cold even, as we get in the valley. Although this year I noticed frost damage on the walnut. And I haven't really seen the frost damage down in the valley this year. Last year was another story. We had severe frost damage. The figs? I don't have figs up here.
We have wild fig trees, and they do really well.
Yeah.
All over the place.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
They're the same.
I tried to select, and I didn't select almonds and pistachios. Pistachios are just too hard to grow anyway up in the north, and even in the valley. And they really need light soils. I do have, however, and we've kept them, because the last few years before we knew what we were going to do is I put in hazelnuts, filberts, hazelnuts, and we're growing them like a shrub. And one of the varieties is growing very well up there. And so they're up in the corner. They're just up in the corner. Yeah. And so I think that it would be interesting if they just keep those here for a while and see what happens. Because I've heard, Dave told me that his father, I think, had one that grew years and did very well. So that's why we were trying hazelnut. So we'll see on that one. The chestnuts were doing okay, but now they've been collapsing. Again, though, if we had put on fertilizer and what, I'm not exactly sure. Because chestnuts do grow up in the foothills. We do have plantings of those, and there are pecan plantings too. So those two tables should give you a fairly good guideline. Apples, if you're going to do apples, fire blight, it can be a problem in bad years if you have wet, warm conditions of bloom. And I did rate the varieties on that. The Granny Smith actually did quite well, but with the rootstock that I listed, which is counter to most of the other rootstocks, which one they perform best on the M7 instead of the M11. Okay?